ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن خير الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما اللهم أرنا حقيقة الأشياء كما هي اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه آمين يا رب العالمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Moving right along, we're in the 10th ruku. Surah Al-Mai'dah has so far shown us a culmination of the discussions that are taking place in Surah Baqarah, Ali Imran, and Nisa. The address to the Bani Israel, the meaningfulness of that address for Bani Israel as well as the people of Islam, the claimants to Iman in the Quran, in Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The final aspects of the Sharia are revealed in Surah Al-Mai'dah as well. The beauty within the structure of Sharia is alluded to, the importance for the struggle that we spoke about yesterday, and how that reflects the attributes of Allah. We briefly alluded to that. We pick up from there, from this ayah onwards. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الرسول messenger بلغ ما أنزل إليك من ربك. Convey whatever has been revealed to you from your Rabb. The pressure on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to communicate the message was immense. It was inconceivable. It was unimaginable. As sensitive as he was, as conscientious as he was with respect to the duty that he owed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the duty that he owed to humanity, his perspective or his understanding of it was so deep that he was troubled by it. He was hurt by it. The burden literally was weighing him down for 23 years straight. And he would do whatever he could to portray that message, to communicate that message. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not just adopt one strategy of communicating the message. He would do it whatever way he could possibly muster. And what worked, he would replicate. What didn't work, he would let go of. What was mandated in one time, he would employ it. Whatever strategy needed to change, he would change it. And he would always be looking within himself to see if there is anything more that needs to be done on his part, or if there is anything that he may not have done that is resulting in the people rejecting him. To the point that the Meccan Quran is rife with consolations and reassurances that don't worry about it, it's not your fault, it's them. So this ayah and many others like it, بَلِّغْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam carried this out to the point, every ayah that criticizes him, that identifies him, that reveals something personal about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would dutifully, without objection, without batting an eye, communicate that to everybody, come what may. He put everything on the line for communicating the message, communicating the truth, that not even an iota of that truth would remain hidden from people in any way. وَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلْ فَمَا بَلَّغْتَ رِسَالَتَهُ. And if you do not, hypothetical situation, if you do not, possibility still open, if you do not, then you have not communicated the message. Wallahu ya'asimuka minan nas. Allah will protect you from the people. And the reassurance that is necessary that in communicating this message, this is tough love that is being expressed in a lot of these ayat. Demands that are being made that people are not going to be comfortable with. What was demanded of Arabia, what was demanded of the Muhajirin and Ansar, what was demanded of Quraysh earlier, it was no joke. It was world changing. It demanded for them to come out of their comfort zones a long way, all the way to Persia and Rome, actually. It demanded of them something that even within their ancestry, they couldn't see. It demanded of desert Arabs to grow to the extent of being a significant force for Roman Persia to contend with. It was flabbergasting. It was flabbergasting. And more than anything else, it was asking of the agreeable nature of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the kind heart of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to again go back to Mecca at 40 years of age. What kind of life has he lived? He's not the spotlight person. He doesn't he doesn't desire to be the center of attention. He doesn't want political power. He has no use for unlimited riches for himself. He would do whatever he could with the wealth that he had or Khadija had for the welfare of the people in his vicinity. But that's about it. He wouldn't engage himself with popularity for the sake of popularity or power for the sake of power. That was not, just wasn't his way. He wouldn't, he was for the most part non-confrontational. And any sort of confrontation that he would engage in would be meaningful. He would not. He was at 40, at his shrewdest, as smart as he was. He was very intelligent. And he knew what was going on in Mecca around him and the implications of everything that people were doing. And it hurt him deeply. But he didn't know how to carry any alternative forward. What was it that he could come up with or do that could change anything about the way the people were behaving? He could identify, he could make the links between their polytheism and the injustice in society. But on what basis, on what authority were he to stand up to do anything about it? He would not, he wasn't an anarchist. He wasn't going to throw something out there and see what happens. He had to have a backing. He had to have a reassurance. When he was troubled, he had, again, age 40. He was looking at the condition of the world around him and it hurt him deeply. It hurt him deeply. His contemplations, meditations, prayer in Hira were very troubled. It wasn't a sanctuary for him in which he was just, attaining the states of nirvana as we would associate with meditative recluses. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very, very hurt, very, very sensitive. And when the Quran was finally revealed, the implications of the revelation, Warqa bin Nawfal told him straight out, you're going to be you're going to be exiled. Your people are going to force you to leave your land. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. My people are going to ask me to leave. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam's lifestyle, what he and Khadija were used to, they were good people. And they were known to be good people. And yet popularity meant very little to him, but being known, being renowned as good, trustworthy, truthful, he valued that highly. These were his hallmarks. He was about to lose that for good. He was about to stand in the face of people he respected deeply. And he was going to suffer their backlash. His children were going to get divorced. His tribe would have to answer the question, do we keep him or do we ostracize him? It was it was heavy. Him communicating the truth in the face of tyranny meant Bilal would continue to be tortured. Yasir and Sumayya would die. Him continuing to preach the truth meant that the pampered Mus'ab bin Umair would no longer be pampered. Forget about being pampered. He wouldn't have a place to stay in his own house. He wouldn't have clothes to wear. The implications of all of what he had to do to communicate truth were very clear in front of him, and they hurt him deeply. And for the person that he was, who would not want to distress another human being for a second, it weighed very heavy on him. He kept going. Wallahu ya'asimuka minan nas. Allah is going to protect you from the people. The moment you are putting out the truth, you are walking around with a target on your head. And quite literally, the target on his head was for his life. وَأَنْتَ حِلٌّ بِهَذَا الْبَلَدِ. Who would have thought? The greatest of progeny of Ibrahim alayhi salam is going to be the most wanted in Mecca. In Mecca, where the father of the murderer of your father was given protection because it's the haram. You can't avenge that. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was open game. Not only that, there was a reward for his life. Wallahu ya'asimuka minan nas. Allah will protect you from the people. Inna Allah la yahdi al-qawm al-kafirin. Allah will not guide the disbelieving people. Qul ya ahl al-kitab, say people of the book, لستم على شيء, you have no standing حتى تقيموا التوراة والإنجيل وما أنزل إليكم من ربكم. You have no standing until you observe what has been revealed in the Torah, until you establish what has been revealed in the Torah, what has been revealed in the Injil, and whatever has been revealed to all of you from your Rabb. You want to reclaim the favor of Allah? You have to take what He has given you seriously. It has to have a significance in your life. You want to have a standing again. By all means, those doors are open. Take what we've given you seriously. وَلَا يَزِيدَنَّ كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُمْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. And for sure what has been revealed to you, Ya Rasulullah, shall increase most of them in rebellion and disbelief. The more truth that comes from Rasulullah, the more enemies he gets. The more transgression, the more disbelief. And yes, enemies for him fuel for the hellfire. And that's not what he wants. He's not vengeful. He's not resentful. He doesn't want that these people disbelieve in him, they suffer in the hellfire. It hurts him to imagine that that's going to be the consequence of him doing his job right. فَلَا تَأْسَى عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. So do not grieve. Again, why is this phrase relevant? Because that feeling is real. Because he's hurt. Because he thinks about the damnation that they're asking for in opposition to him. And hellfire is a place he wouldn't even wish for his worst enemies. And so he does grieve for them, which is why he's asked not to. Don't worry about them. Don't grieve about these disbelieving people. For sure, the Muslims, the Jews, the Sabians, and the Christians, Man amana billahi wal yawmil akhir wa amila salihan, the ones who believe in Allah and the last day and act. Again, whether it's the Hadu, the Sabi'un, the Nasara, or the Alladhina amanu, here meaning Muslims, the requirement has always been belief, yes, but that which translates into solid action, required action, not belief that is a pronouncement for initiation in a cult, for the acquisition of a label. No. Why do you continue to reduce this incredible opportunity of Islam? Islam is an opportunity for Iman, opportunity for Ihsan, opportunity to get the wasila to Allah, opportunity to become the best you can possibly become. Because once that opportunity was taken up by Rasulullah and the Arabs, the zone of proximal what's the word? The Vygotsky term. Zone of proximal development went through the roof. It went through the roof. What the Arabs were capable of prior to the Quran and what they became capable of after the Quran, after Islam, after entering in. Because at every step of the way, there were demands made of them and they said, Labbaik. It wasn't easy, but they said it and a miracle was achieved in a span of 23 years. Action. The more Islam you understand, the more Islam you develop in yourselves, the more proactive, the more results it should yield. Measurable results. فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. There will be no fear on them and nor will they grieve. We have one of the primary motivations that we have towards spirituality, towards any sort of religiosity or any sort of joining of a group. It is fear-based. There is an existential angst or an existential anxiety. Who are we? What are we? Where do we come from? What's going to become of us? What's going to become of all of humanity? What's going to become of me? Forget the rest of humanity. That's the question that sits inside me, that worries me. There's a hope that every human being has. And what groups offer, what religions offer is a security against that khawf. Another drive, an emotional drive for a spiritual fulfillment is the huzn, something that we can't contend with from childhood onwards. And that is the idea of loss. It's not there anymore. The very primitive experience of that, developmentally speaking, is separation from a mother. Loss. What do we do? She's not here anymore. How are we going to operate? We lost her. We used to have her all the time. We were one. That oneness was disrupted. A separation came in. Now there's time of the day that I have to spend without her. How does that make sense? That incredibly traumatic experience every single human being goes through. And how parallel to that is the development of language. And with the development of language is a semblance of control that comes in. A control that, in the absence of mother, I can retain her in language. And then from her name, it becomes her legacy. But then this transition for language to actually be able to reassure me of the loss that I've experienced, language has to take on very complicated conceptions as I do grow older, because I continue to experience loss. I continue to make attachments to people, to things, and I continue to experience their limitations and loss. And each loss is representative of the ultimate loss that I will experience in the form of death, where everything will be lost. And the question's always looming over me, so what's the point? What's the point? It is all going to go away anyways, good or bad. It's not going to last. And if it doesn't last, what's the point? So this person coming from within, and again, the religious groups, socially, one of the functions that they perform is they offer this security against loss, this consolation, this reassurance. They offer to be the mother or the father, that we're going to be, we'll embrace you. We'll take hold of you. You can be a part of us. You can feel like family here. And all of what you lose, don't worry about it. The family will ultimately be reunited and get it back. The Quran adds something to that list. The Quran says this becoming a part of a group is not going to cut it for your huzn or your khawf. What is going to cut it is consistent amal salih. That iman, other than being an announcement of your membership for the group, is supposed to be a step in the direction of proactivity, of action, of social change, consistently. And because that is a consistent requirement, the feeling of angst and loss is also a consistent experience. And the protection that even the highest form of spiritual commitment gives or provides against fear and against loss, against anxiety, against depression, is at best relative. At best relative. Ultimate is promised in the hereafter in the form of paradise. For here, as far as we've already seen, the Quran does not promise, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not promise the Sahaba any, didn't sing them lullabies. Join us and everything is going to be perfectly fine and okay. Those who did interpret this from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's message, we will see in Ahzab, we've already started seeing, we saw a lot of that in Nisa. When the going got tough, they got confused. What the hell is this? We were promised luxuries. We were promised ease and comfort. We're having to struggle. We're having to sacrifice. This doesn't sound right. So the most that this commitment brings is a relative degree of satisfaction, a relative degree of protection against anxiety, against grief, as because the anxiety and grief is going to be perpetual. As long as you're alive, as long as you're alive, you're going to have to confront them one form or another. For the course of your religious development, for the achievement of your spiritual goals, you're going to have to form emotional attachments. And then you're going to have to let them go. You're going to have to employ your own personality's inclinations towards liking this and liking that and loving this and having a passion for that, so as to direct that as amal salih. But then there will always come a time where you're going to be asked to give it up, to let it go. And that's going to be tough. And that's going to be tough. And you will have to relearn the lesson of inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un again and again and again, with a new meaning each time, hopefully, with a deeper understanding. Not new altogether, but deeper, stronger, more meaningful. Because as you move forward, as you grow, the extent of the loss seems to increase. The degree of fear only looks to increase. Ahzab for the Muslim community was far more threatening than anything Badr or Uhud or any other expedition brought in. And then Tabuk, it just kept getting tougher and tougher. So the فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, ultimately in the Akhirah, most definitely and on a consistent basis for the consistent confrontations with fear and huzn in this world, just enough to maintain that polarity that keeps you going, keeps you working, keeps you working. Any conception of amana billahi wal yawm al-akhir that takes that polarity, that necessary polarity away. What is that polarity? What you are and what you need to be. Because what you need to be, you have to do, you have to work, you have to walk and struggle towards. And in struggling towards that, with the hope, with the aspiration that this is going to do it for me. And then as soon as you get to that manzil or that goal, you've made that contribution, you've eternalized an abstract potential, made it forever real in the form of as concrete as an action can get. A new demand is made. You're asked to get up, move on. The cycle starts. But it's not cyclical. You're not going around in circles. It's progressively higher levels. لَقَدْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل. And so we did take a covenant from the Bani Israel. وَأَرْسَلْنَا إِلَيْهِمْ رُسُلًا. And we sent messengers towards them. كُلَّمَا جَاءَهُمْ رَسُولٌ بِمَا لَا تَهْوَى أَنفُسُهُمْ. Whenever a messenger came to them, which was not in accordance with their desires. See, you take the whole ayah, you take away وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا, the action that is required, and you just restrict it to آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. You just restrict it to a group that this proclamation of Iman makes you a member of. You're satisfied, you're happy. I'm in, I did it. This is my group. We're going to paradise. This is our caravan. And the next stop, Jannatul Firdaus. Woo-hoo. As soon as the Prophet comes and bursts your bubble, yo, what's going on here? You had work to do. You had stuff to take care of. Like, what? Why did you have to do that? We're having so much fun here. We're all so cool together. We're like, next stop paradise. That's the tahwa anfusum. The religion having become a wish fulfillment. فَرِيقًا كَذَّبُوا. They denied some of them. وَفَرِيقًا يَقْتُلُونَ. And even killed others. How passionately their religiosity was wish fulfillment, that as soon as that bubble of that wish was burst, whoever threatened to burst it, they're like, we're going to get you out of the way, even if it was a prophet. The greatest example of what they're trying to do with Isa alayhi salam. وَحَسِبُوا أَلَّا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةً. As they assumed there will be no punishment. We're part of the group, man. We're part of this caravan of paradise. فَعَمُوا وَصَمُّوا. And they turned blind and deaf. ثُمَّ تَابَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ. And yet Allah turned to them in forgiveness, gave them another opportunity, gave them another chance, consistently, generation after generation, as well as for an individual, one stage of life after another. ثُمَّ عَمُوا وَصَمُّوا. Again, they became blind and deaf. What does it mean to become blind and deaf? You're not seeing, you're not listening. And what do you see? What do you listen? It's the result of your actions. It's when your bubbles are burst by someone and they're telling you how that was a bubble, or how when you disagreed with them, how you didn't look at the ayat or haqq or truth that they brought, turned away from it, weren't willing to look at that or listen to that, and then in turning away from it, you saw that according to your own predictions, your own understandings, it didn't work out. It didn't work out. But you became blind and deaf to that. Again, what tools are we talking about? For a spiritual growth, ability to see, observation, ability to hear. Wallahu basirun bima ya'malun. But Allah was watching all of what they did. They were blind to their own actions and the consequences of their actions. And listening to somebody telling them, yo, this is where you messed up. You still got a chance. Come right over, let me show you how it's done. What more you need to be doing. No. We already know whatever there is to know. Allah is watching. You don't want to watch? By all means. لقد كفر الذين قالوا إن الله هو المسيح ابن مريم. And they've disbelieved. They have committed kufr. Those who say that Allah Himself is the Messiah, the son of Maryam. وقال المسيح. Whereas the Messiah said, يا بني إسرائيل اعبدوا الله ربي وربكم. Bani Israel, enter into the ibadah of Allah, my Rabb, and your Rabb. Let's get this relationship going. Rabb Abd. That's what Isa alayhi salam said. But when you have to, when the dissonance necessitates this rationalization, when the in-group contentment against huzn, against khawf, is threatened by a demand for action, where you're so content with the paradise that you've made for yourself on earth, in your head, in your bubbles, and consistently evidence is to the contrary, truth is pointing towards the other direction, then you're compelled to reinforce, to strengthen, to rationalize the deviance of your ways. When people are starting to develop doubt, this is not working out, then the mind starts working. Okay, how do we make sense of it? Reality proved us wrong. What do we do? So either you can take the evidence of reality seriously and upgrade what was previously holding you in the bubble, the beliefs that you were so strongly latched onto, the umbilical cord that you're unwilling to cut. You could have reconsidered that and seen what reality is showing you, as unnerving as that may be. Or you could confront the reality hitting you hard in the face and bursting your bubble by going back to those beliefs and strengthening them further by more stories. You know what? You know why we need to continue in this failed experiment? God was Jesus. Jesus was God. Oh my God. Really? And how prophet becomes God, just so that amani, that wish, you can continue to hold on to it. You don't have to let it go. You don't have to let it go. So nobody steals your Christmas. And you can sleep easy that Santa is going to come tomorrow with a lot of gifts for you. Fair enough? إِنَّهُ مَن يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ. Isa was very clear. And you have testimony to that in your books. That whoever ascribed any associate with Allah, with Him, فَقَدْ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةِ. Allah has forbidden him paradise. Isn't this what makes you a monotheist? Isn't these descriptions, elaborate discussions within the Bible against shirk, isn't that the defining feature of what your religiosity is about? So he's going to reject all gods other than Allah and then place himself on their seats? How does that work? فَقَدْ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةَ وَمَأْوَاهُ النَّارِ. His abode for the person who does that is hellfire. وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ أَنصَارٍ. And there will be no one to help the unjust people. Unjust in what they've done with this understanding of Tawheed, unjust in how they, who were worthy of God, sold themselves short and saw themselves as no better than the worshippers of one idol or another, and unjust as to how these levels of injustice to themselves manifested in their oppression of whoever else was in their circle of influence, their circle of relationship. The vulnerabilities of your close ones, those under your authority, they became all the more acute. And dhulm at all of these three levels. لَقَدْ كَفَرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ الثَّالِثُ ثَلَاثَةٍ. They have disbelieved those who have said that Allah is one of three. Again, all of these fabrications, ways of maintaining that in-group state of nirvana that allows you to evade responsibility and continue in the bubble. وَمَا مِنْ إِلَهٍ إِلَّا إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. Well, there is no one, no ilah, other than the one God, the one ilah. وَإِن لَمْ يَنْتَهُوا عَمَّا يَقُولُونَ. And if they don't stop saying what they say, لَيَمَسَّنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Then those among them who disbelieved will definitely face a painful torture, a painful punishment. أَفَلَا يَتُوبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَيَسْتَغْفِرُونَهُ. Don't they repent before Allah and seek His forgiveness? Allahu Ghafurur Rahim. Allah is forgiving and merciful. مَا الْمَسِيحُ ابْنُ مَرْيَمَ إِلَّا الرَّسُولُ. The Messiah, son of Maryam, was no more than a messenger. قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. Many messengers have passed on before him. وَأُمُّهُ صِدِّيقَةٌ. And his mother was a Siddiqah, in the sense that she was truthful. But then Siddiqah, in the terminology of the Quran, or for that matter, being truthful, getting that certificate from within the Quran, from within the terminology of the Quran, is saying it is placing you at a different level altogether. It is Abu Bakr Siddiq, he was given this certification of being Siddiq. It is speaking of an achievement that certain people are predisposed to, or if they work towards, they are likely to acquire. As is uh, the title, Shaheed. It is that, those are the titles you want to work for. But did you really get them or not get them? That's decided by Allah. Communicated by Rasulullah, but we don't have that communication either. So now Siddiq Shaheed is Day of Judgment decision. كان يأكلان الطعام. Both of them used to eat food. انظر كيف نبين لهم الآيات. Look how we clarify the ayat for them. ثم انظر أن يؤفكون. Then look, how are they turned away? Ayat in front of them, yet they turn away, yet they insist. قُلْ أَتَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. Ask them, would you enter into the ibadah of someone other than Allah? مَا لَا يَمْلِكُ لَكُمْ ضَرًّا وَلَا نَفْعًا. Who has no authority neither to harm you nor to bring you any benefit. وَاللَّهُ هُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. Whereas Allah is all hearing, all knowing. See the benefit of taking on a God that in your heart of hearts you know can't hear, can't know, is that you can sneak around and do pretty much a whole lot that you wouldn't be able to do if the only one you were worshiping is the all-hearing, all-knowing. Because it's so convenient. Because when you're presented before the one who wasn't all-hearing, all-knowing, and you're like, what the hell am I hearing? You did this? No, I didn't. I love you. They can fall for it. In your head, you can get away with so much more if it is a limited being that you have to ultimately be answerable to, who is so soft of heart is going to say, don't worry about it. You're okay. You're with me. Oh, you love me? That's so nice of you. So in our puny rationalizations, which take on incredibly complicated and convincing forms, but ultimately their fruit is what? What are they betrayed by? Their social impotence, the injustice that emanates from them, the inactivity, the passivity, the opioid that those conceptions serve as. والله هو السميع العليم قل يا أهل الكتاب لا تغلوا في دينكم غير الحق. Say, O people of the book, do not exceed. Al-Kitab, Torah, Injil. By extension, Al-Kitab, Quran. Do not exceed limits in your religion. Guess what? There's limits in religion. Even in religiosity, in spirituality, there are limits. And the moment you start exceeding those limits, you are the worst representatives of that religion. Without truth, without evidence, evidence based practice, evidence based beliefs. The moment you take that condition, that precondition of evidence away, or you define it so vaguely, or you're absolutely, absolutely relativistic as to what qualifies as evidence, anything goes. Anything goes. Evidence doesn't have boundaries anymore. Truth is thrown out. And when that starts happening, who are the worst representations of religiosity on walking on earth? The religious people. Who are the ones complicit in the oppression against humanity? Religious people. And when kind-hearted, justice-oriented people with eyes and ears see the effects of this sort of a criminal religiosity, and when they have the bravery to stand up and ask, what the hell is this? You're doing all of this in the name of religion? And then the religious people say, God told us to do it. It is our belief in God that leads us, and you should too. And then the other person's like, this is God? This is what he wants us to do? This is what he sanctions, allows? This is what goes on in his name? We don't want to have anything to do with this God. You keep your God to yourself. We're better off without him. We're better off without him. We don't want to have anything to do with a God in whose camp there are so many believers, and men, women, and children are not safe. The properties are not safe. We don't want to have anything to do with them. We don't want to have anything to do with the God that sanctions the actions of these criminals in power. Thank you very much. We don't want to have anything to do with a God who's utterly unconcerned with our state of affairs, with where we're at. We don't want to have anything to do with them. Thank you very much. We'd rather take care of these people ourselves. And so now humanitarian work Humanism is a standard that is raised in opposition to religion. It becomes a religion in itself, a godless one. Humanity first. Why, why did why did this slogan ever have to be raised? Because the conception of, or the mainstream effect of religion, of the religious age, the culmination of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim rule was such that in the name of religion, humanity was last and humanity was suffering. Why? Because there was taghlu fi dinikum. There were extremes in religion. So do not cross extremes or do not exceed limits. Do not go to extremes in your religion. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا أَهْوَاءَ قَوْمٍ قَدْ ضَلُّوا مِنْ قَبْلِ. Do not follow the desires of people who went astray before you. The moment you start crossing boundaries, you have opened up the doors to following the desires of one group or another. Or you have followed in the legacy of how other religions got misled. Whereas the inability to distinguish demonic religiosity from divine religiosity, inability to distinguish that. And demonic religiosity is, for the most part, or even in its entirety, the pleasure, the vain desires, the limitless desires of a class of people, where all that they ever want to get out of it is that state of nirvana, that tranquility and peace, that bliss. And anything that asks of them to let that go, to put that on the line for some human good, you don't want to do that. Religion becomes a comfort zone. Religion becomes a reason why people don't want to get out of their comfort zone. Humanity suffers. وَأَضَلُّوا كَثِيرًا, and they misled many. وَضَلُّوا عَنْ سَوَاءِ السَّبِيلِ, and they went way off track. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. لعن الذين كفروا من بني إسرائيل على لسان داود وعيسى بن مريم. So cursed were those who disbelieved from among the Bani Israel through the words of Dawood and Isa, the son of Maryam. The prophets of Allah, they never held back. They were not supposed to hold back. And now it makes more sense looking at the ayah telling Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Balligh ma unzila ilayk." Proclaim, communicate, convey what is being revealed to you, because he has to perform this function of lu'in alladhina kafaru, that the people from within his own community, and kufr doesn't necessarily just mean leaving or rejecting Islam. As we have seen within the fold of Islam, after having become Muslim, there are acts of that are tantamount to kufr, right? There are attitudes which would be of kufr, right? Not kufr that anyone can do takfir of you and push you or judge you to be out of Islam, but it's for individual standards, for our own personal reflections and a social reflection. That as a community, are we a people of Iman or are we a people of kufr? Individual judgments to a side, not our place to make them. Nevertheless, it is to pronounce against these attitudes, these behaviors, these actions, strict criticisms. Call them a spade when they are a spade. To be that blunt is one of the responsibility. It is a prophetic responsibility. And the nicest, I mean, when you think Dawood alayhi salam, you think melody, you think singing, you think somebody in his most beautiful voice doing tasbih and hamd of Allah along with birds, and that's the image you get. I mean, we're going to talk about him a little bit later on, maybe next year, and what he's portrayed as, he just wants to pray. He wants to spend time worshiping. Isa alayhi salam, who could be more soft-hearted than the one who wants to turn the other cheek, who advocates that? It was a necessity at that time. The entirety of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time in Makkah was about turning the other cheek. The one who, when he sees the carcass of a dog and everyone's just put off by the smell and the hideousness of the sight, talks about how white its teeth are. I mean, the one who is as soft-hearted as Isa alayhi salam was. And so, particularly these prophets being referred to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who's also very soft-hearted. And to be blunt, to express this tough love, it isn't easy. It is asking him, as it asked them, to come way out of their comfort zones, way out of their comfort, to hurt other people for their own good, to hurt their feelings, to be to let them know that their religiosity is more demonic than divine. To let them know that. And you will see Isa alayhi salam in biblical passages doing that repeatedly, repeatedly, repeatedly. He would tell the most practicing of them that you're like graves. You're beautiful, decorated on the outside, but nothing inside, death inside. There's a lot of pomp, there's a lot of show, there's a lot of decor on the outside, but empty inside. This is his criticism of their religiosity. Called them whitewashed tombs. He would say that these are the temple, the equivalent of the masjid, is a den of robbers. These are biblical verses. He would say that you're the kind of people who are so obsessive over things so small. You're filtering out gnats, you're filtering out mosquitoes, while not paying attention that you're swallowing camels, you're devouring such, you've allowed yourself such flagrant sins, which are not sins in your book, but then you're obsessive about the nitty-gritty of religiosity. All of these, you'll find the Bible talks to the Bani Israel and says, you are that wife that cheated on her husband the first night. Speaking about that incident of taking the ijl as God. So the Quran refers to passages like those and says that Bani Israel has already experienced this. This is a prophetic duty. لعن الذين كفروا من بني إسرائيل على لسان داود وعيسى بن مريم ذلك بما عصوا. That was because they disobeyed. وكانوا يعتدون, and they exceeded limits. كانوا لا يتناهون عن منكر فعلوه. They did not stop one another from their evil practices that they were involved in. And so it took for a prophet to call them out for that as well. That there's evil prevailing and you're silent. That means you're complicit. You're party to it. لَبِئْسَ مَا كَانُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. How wretched was that which they were doing. يَفْعَلُونَ يَعْمَلُونَ. The little Arabic that I was able to pick up from whatever of Ustaz Numan Ali Khan that I heard, يَفْعَلُونَ is more reflexive action. It is more automative. It is more something that just, you just do. يَعْمَلُونَ is more conscious, more deliberate. Here, the criticism or the wretchedness of just not consciously deliberating and getting out of those reflexive, reactive modes where it goes on as usual. You see it, you ignore it, you move on. And do not respond to the evil, which would have been an amal, which would have been an active, conscious, deliberated, deliberate conduct. No, you, rather than conduct, you were more of, it was a behavior, stimulus response. In this case, stimulus, but no response. You became habituated in that. The more habituated something is, the more fi'l it is. The more conscious, deliberate, outside of your comfort zone it is, the more amal, the more effort it takes. ترى كثيرا منهم يتولون الذين كفروا. You will see many of them befriending the disbelievers. لبئس ما قدمت لهم أنفسهم. How wretched is what they sent forth for themselves. And سخط الله عليهم. That Allah's wrath is on them. وفي العذاب هم خالدون. And they will be living in the punishment forever. So there's the priorities that they have towards their own people, towards a society that they're not interested in. But when it comes to this diplomacy, for those who have openly declared their animosity and intent for war even against their people, they're perfectly fine with them. وَلَوْ كَانُوا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَالنَّبِيِّ وَمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْهِ. Had they believed in Allah and the Prophet and what has been revealed to him, مَتَّخَذُوهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءَ. They would have not adopted them as friends. They would have not taken those people as allies, those who are sworn enemies. وَلَكِنَّ كَثِيرًا مِنْهُمْ فَاسِقُونَ. But most of them are rebels. لَتَجِدَنَّ أَشَدَّ النَّاسِ عَدَاوَةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الْيَهُودَ وَالَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا. And you will find of all of mankind, those who are most severe in enmity towards the believers are the Yahud and the Mushriks. And this says something. Because as far as Sharia is concerned, as far as faith or tenets of faith are concerned, you would find Judaism to be the closest to Islam. To be the closest to Islam. But as far as the effects of scripture gone wrong, or a degenerate society of scripture, a people of scripture who have gone way off track, the effects are very similar to a society of shirk. A society of shirk. That ultimately, when polytheism is carried on in the garb of monotheism, it's more devastating. And so when the two of them are confronted with, when those attitudes are confronted with Islam, Rasulullah, Sahaba, and how the Quran is being represented by them, it triggers them the first. It brings out the most enmity in them. وَلَتَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. And you will find the closest in affection towards the people of Iman, towards the believers, الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّا نَصَارَى. Those who say we're Christians. These are patterns. Exceptions are to be kept in mind. This is not absolutely generalizable that all of them are going to be like this, but necessarily the patterns are something that we've all experienced. History bears witness to it, and anyone who um, has experience with them will find, and generally, you will find Christians to be more kind-hearted people. They're like their empathy, their kindness, their the way they reach out for you, the way they would go out of their way for you. It's exceptional. It's mind-boggling, actually, how much they're willing to do for humanity, for others, and that's become it's something that this graciousness, the people who celebrated God's grace the most are the most gracious and have given this gift of graciousness to humanity the most as well. And how much of missionary activity is accompanied by activities of charity, of healthcare, of food, of simply poverty alleviation for other people. It's it's for everyone to see. ولتجدن أقربهم مودة للذين آمنوا الذين قالوا إنا نصارى ذلك بأن منهم قسيسين ورهبانا. That is because from within them are true priests and monks. وأنهم لا يستكبرون, and because they're not arrogant. That from within their ranks, their religious leadership, there is goodness. And their trait of humility allows for them to open their hearts more. And consequently, you would always also find not only in their treatment and the love that they extend towards Muslims, you will find Christians are more fervent. You would also find that their openness to studying and learning to Islam and embracing it is also more of a Christian thing rather than a Jewish or a, in our day and age, Hindu thing. وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ. Moreover, when they listen to what has been revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, تَرَى أَعْيُنَهُمْ تَفِيضُ مِنَ الدَّمْعِ مِمَّا عَرَفُوا مِنَ الْحَقِّ. You will see that their eyes filled with tears as they have recognized the truth. That their connection, their commitment to Isa alayhi salam, to Maryam salamun alayha, and generally to the prophetic tradition and scripture is such that they're able to identify the sibship, if you will, or that these are that the Quran and the Bible are not strangers. There is a kinship between them. There is strong relationship between them. They're from the same source. They're able to pick up on it. They're able to see the harmony. They're able to see the beauty as it complements. And so يقولون ربنا آمنا. And they say, our Rabb, we have believed. فَاكْتُبْنَا مَعَ الشَّاهِدِينَ. So register us among the witnesses, those who have borne witness. So again, their greater love, their openness, their humility leads to their taking these ayats more seriously, and eventually some of them ending up embracing. وَمَا لَنَا لَا نُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَمَا جَاءَنَا مِنَ الْحَقِّ. And they would say, why would we not believe in Allah and what has come to us from the truth? The humility as a necessary ingredient for openness to al-haq. وَنَطْمَعُ أَن يُدْخِلَنَا رَبَّنَا مَعَ الْقَوْمِ الصَّالِحِينَ. And we hope that our Rabb will admit us with the righteous people. Contrast this with this belligerent certainty that we've been speaking about. That is in its conviction, that belligerent certainty about their own faith. Not about the articles of faith, but about their own faithfulness towards those articles. They're very convinced. Here you see a more probabilistic, a more hopeful, a more humble approach in which the faithfulness, there's always a lingering suspicion about it. There is hope, but there is always that fear as well. What if we don't? And بين الخوف والرجاء, this between fear and hope, they balance the beauty of their faith. ونطمع أن يدخلنا ربنا مع القوم الصالحين فأثابهم الله بما قالوا. So Allah rewarded them for what they said. جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار, with gardens beneath which rivers flow, خالدين فيها, to live in them forever. وذلك جزاء المحسنين, and that is a reward for the people of ihsan, for the people of excellence, for people who sought excellence, for the people who sought beauty. والذين كفروا وكذبوا بآياتنا, in contrast, those who disbelieve and reject our signs, أولئك أصحاب الجحيم, these are going to be the companions of the hellfire. And it is interesting to note that this ayah, and there was a similar one in Surah Al-Imran, in which this reaction of a group of Christians to the Quran is noted. That they hear these ayat of Allah and there's this resonance, this kinship that they're able to appreciate, that it hits them, and how they start streaming, their eyes start streaming with tears. On one instance, Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu commented on that. And he said that there was a time when our hearts were as soft towards the recitation of Quran. This is the one with the softest of hearts, who recognizes that things were different. And of course, there is no question that the maturity of his faith at that time is unparalleled. And the new group, as passionate, as zealous as they are, can't even come close to the faithfulness of Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that has seen the test of time, that has stood the test of time. Yet this comment tells you something about the emotional response to the ayat of Allah. That there can be a spiritual maturity which is emotionally not as responsive, is not as responsive as a spiritual naivety, as an earlier stage of spiritual development. It's quite a possibility that you're more fervent, more zealous, more committed, more overwhelmed with passion emotionally in the earlier stages of your spiritual growth, the honeymoon period of spirituality, than in the later stages. It doesn't say that there's any regression necessarily. Regression and possibility is also there, of course, but there's another level of demand at a higher. Bottom line being, emotions cannot be the ultimate marker. They're an important marker throughout this journey in different ways, but not the absolute marker. In any case, يا أيها الذين آمنوا, you who have believed, لا تحرموا طيبات ما أحل الله لكم. So do not prohibit the pure things which Allah has made permissible for you. ولا تعتدوا, and do not transgress. Do not transgress. Do not let people get away with irresponsible living, irresponsible conduct by absolving themselves through more and more prohibitions upon themselves. Don't let this become a priority in your religious camps, where when they identify what it means to be religious, then it is in synchrony with a pathological guilt that they're harboring for one reason or another, which may have been worsened by emotional and spiritual blackmailing, which is prevalent in the name of religious preaching. And that pathological guilt then finds this punitive, this subtle ways of self-harm, self-punishment, very alluring, very attractive, very atoning, and calls it a day at that. calls it a day at that. The rest of what religious growth or spiritual growth demands is lost. And that impractical degree of prohibition is unsustainable to the point that eventually those who even take this upon themselves, that for them, their connection with Allah is all about what they cannot do more than anything else. But at one level, they desperately want to do all of that. But their commitment to religiosity is so strong and so rigid to even acknowledge that they want to do otherwise is something that they can no longer fathom. And they wouldn't allow for that wish in their conscious daily life to manifest in their heads. They wouldn't acknowledge that all that they have pronounced haram upon themselves is something of a natural desire that springs up every now and then. They wouldn't even allow that desire to naturally spring up. There would be guilt associated with that. The haram police outside has a haram policeman inside. And that policeman, as soon as that incredibly haram wish springs up, patah, shut up. Doesn't allow it to spring up. And so it springs up in dreams. It springs up in the form of resentment against God, against their own selves, further pathologizing that guilt, further worsening that guilt. Because you can't be resentful towards God. You can't voice that resentment. But that resentment is growing. The possibility of good that that person is capable of is, as time goes by, shriveling away. Because that burden of pathological guilt and resentment against God, and how that manifests itself as hatred for humanity, for other people in humanity. And that manifests itself as an arrogant and condescending preaching activity, where in their presence people feel constantly judged, looked down upon, dismissed, and rejected. And this individual and social catastrophe that this religion of haramness promotes and continues to promote. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تحرموا طيبات ما أحل الله لكم. To proclaim something haram is a big deal. Big deal. Can't take it lightly. Haram is a big word. Do not prohibit the pure things which Allah has made permissible for you. وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا, and do not transgress. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Allah does not like those who overstep. Again, this concept that has developed, that the harder it is for you, the more it crushes your desires, the more tasteless it is, the more bitter and sour it is, the better, the more righteous it is. Why? These extreme expressions of religiosity are seen as a sign of taqwa or higher taqwa. It is closer to taqwa the greater that you do. Okay? Suit yourselves. وَكُلُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا, and eat permissible and pure food of what Allah has provided you with. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي أَنْتُمْ بِهِ مُؤْمِنُونَ, and have the taqwa of Allah in whom you are believers. لَا يُؤَاخِذُكُمُ اللَّهُ بِاللَّغْوِ فِي أَيْمَانِكُمْ, Allah will not call you to account for unintentional oaths. No, you just randomly, wallahi, by Allah, Allah ki qasam, Allah ki qasam, keep saying that. You don't mean it. It's just a part of your speech now. It's rhetorical. It says something about you, but not something to be held accountable for. وَلَكِنْ يُؤَاخِذُكُمْ بِمَا عَقَّدتُّمُ الْإِيمَانِ, but He will hold you to account for oaths which you swear with earnest. Everyone knows within their own speech and in conversation with others when an oath is being taken, which is not just the random rhetorical wallahi. It is for good. It is um, consciously intended. فكفارته إطعام عشرة مساكين من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم. So the penalty of breaking an oath, that conscious, deliberate, well thought out, intended oath, or at least thought out, even if it's not well thought out, but thought out nevertheless. The penalty of breaking an oath, because you have to take your commitment seriously. You can't, Allah, for one thing, Allah is not going to go to the extreme of holding you to account for everything that emanates from your tongue. He's not going to do that. But also, He doesn't want you to take commitments to start going to the other extreme of taking commitments lightly altogether. So when you do make an oath like this, so that the sanctity of the word of a human being and their commitment is taken seriously, if you do break such a commitment that you made in the name of God, then you feed 10 people to make up for it with the food which you normally provide to your family. أو كسوتهم, or provide clothing to them. أو تحرير رقبة, or you set a slave free. Again, for a person to come to recognize the social import of personal conduct. The compensation is social activities, activities of social engagement, of social empowerment, of social development, of social welfare, right? Of letting people grow economically, liberating a slave, feeding 10 people, taking care of their clothes, the way you would for your own family. All of these ways for you to recognize the gravity of your oaths, and then for something good to emanate from um, a wrongful act that you're guilty of. And what that does as an appropriate channeling of that guilt as well. Because guilt has a pathological potential. It has an incredibly spiritual potential. It has a potential for growth. It can be pathological as well. أو كسوتهم أو تحرير رقبة فمن لم يجد فصيام ثلاثة أيام. And the one who cannot find, the priority is the social welfare, but if there's no resources for that, then the 3 days of continuous fasting. ذلك كفارة أيمانكم إذا حلفتم. That is the expiation of your oath which you've sworn. واحفظوا أيمانكم. Bottom line, protect your oaths. كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تشكرون. This is how Allah makes His ayat clear to you that you may become grateful, to the path for gratitude. يا أيها الذين آمنوا, you who have believed, إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام. For sure, intoxicants, gambling, altars, stone altars, and divining arrows. رجس من عمل الشيطان, are filthy acts of shaitan. فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. Stay away from them so that you may succeed. What are intoxicants good for? Direct stimulation of, chemical stimulation of pleasure. Happiness is to be had, or pleasure is to be had, by genuinely psychological or spiritual achievements. Something social that you've done, something in terms of a relationship that you've achieved, in terms of a professional development that you've achieved, in terms of a spiritual growth that you're engaged in. Natural byproduct of that is a contentment and measurable by dopamine release in your brain. Measurable. It correlates. You bypass that. You go stimulate the brain centers directly. Now it's pleasure for the sake of pleasure. Now, pleasure is not a byproduct of a meaningful activity, it is an end in itself. It is being done for its own sake. And intoxicants open the doors to all of that. And had we taken this phenomenon seriously and recognized what it is worth and how important it is for society, then the degree to which alcohol is felt to be haram, or the stigma that it is, understandably and rightfully so, within Muslim communities, that would extend to other drugs that have a similar effect, some which have a more devastating effect. And there could be something done to curtail the devastation that drug abuse causes within society. Unfortunately, we didn't take the effects of these phenomena within society seriously enough. And so now there is a generation of being lost to the cult of pleasure, to the cult of happiness in the form of drugs. Gambling, money on money, making money off of money, right? It takes, interest was the certainty of profit. Gambling is the other end of that extreme. Business is risky, gambling is incredibly risky. But the hit, the high that you get from winning, the top, it is very similar to what drugs give you, what intoxicants give you. It's a straight hit. Again, the degree to which drugs hit and give you the pleasure is usually unattainable by normal, tedious effort in real life. Literally quantifiable. That if usual achievements, regular routine achievements in your life release 100 units of dopamine in your head, then what you get out of drugs will be off the charts. It'll be multiplied, much more than that. And it's that hit which is so addictive. In gambling as well, when you hit the jackpot, when you win, when your luck cashes out, the amount of cash that you get, what that does to you, the reward and the just simply in terms of magnitude, it is so much addictive. And that addictive nature of these activities is what keeps you going back for more, for more, for more, for more, for more. Both in gambling and in alcohol, the short-term benefit that you got, the immediate gratification that you got, and the extent to which you got it, it is usually, it's short-lived, and for the most part, Addicts and gamblers search in vain for that magnitude for the rest of their lives. It's not regular, it's very irregular in how much how it satisfies your pleasure centers. That's what, but it, you can say this definitely for an addict, that the high that they got the first time around, especially the harder drugs, is something that they're chasing for the rest of their lives. And pretty soon, it's not about pleasure, it's about avoidance of pain. It's what not doing that activity, what that does to them. It's the pain, the physical pain, the mental pain, the anxiety, the depression. They go back to just rid themselves of the pain. It's not positive pleasure anymore. It's negative pleasure, which is avoidance or treatment of the pain that has now started developing. Gambling is similar. Idolatry, ansab, again, instant gratification, a bargain in which you play both hands. You're on both ends of the contract. You define the terms, you define the standards, you define the conditions, you define what it entails of you. What more could you want? Azlam, divining arrows, divining futures. Take away the responsibility of choice. You just attribute that to the superstitions that have done it for you. The responsibility of choice, the the growth potential in making a real choice in life based off of experience, knowledge, other people's genuine advice, that's taken away. The leap of faith, of tawakkul in Allah and in yourself, that's taken away. How all of these activities ultimately breed a demonic selfishness. Self interest is an inherent human trait. We want pleasure, we want money, we want um, a security that comes in spirituality. We want that. We want to know what we should do in the future. But in all of these wants is this role of your own self taking the effort, making a choice, doing the work, being responsible for it, and then the element of trust in Allah. In all of these avenues of immediate gratification, that's taken away. That's taken away. And that very natural instinct, desire for pleasure, for money, for a religious satisfaction, for knowing the future, in all of these activities, that is displaced by a very selfish, that the self-interest becomes selfish, which becomes demonically selfish, to the point that you're blinded to the other. All you see is, what is it in for me? And overall, the culture of selfishness is community destroying. It is not life-giving. الرجس من عمل الشيطان. Therefore, these are filthy acts of shaitan. فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. So stay away from them. Perhaps you may be successful. Falah, as an individual, breaking free of these demonic inclinations within you, making appropriate use of those very natural instincts for pleasure, wealth, satisfaction, knowledge, at least these four, and appropriately channeling them in the long term process that real life is. These are all cop outs, these are all shortcuts, these are all the, the forbidden trees that promise you once you just eat from the tree, bliss. And each of them, each attempt at the tree only makes you to realize more and more that it's the long game that is required of you, the long run, the marathon that you're required to run. Shortcuts don't work. Shortcuts don't work. And it's when you get the idea of shortcuts out of your head, put in the real effort, take the real risks, suffer the real losses, learn from your mistakes, from your sin, from the whole process actually begins. That's that's falah for individuals as well as for a community. This is you wrestling through that, channeling these gifts of Allah that your instincts are in the appropriate direction through self-discipline and taking them to their rightful place, to their honored place. All the conflicting, contradicting situations they create within your person, your psyche, you navigate those, orient those contradictions in a self-transcendent direction, and you see how they bloom, how they become incredibly divine in their expression, in their manifestation along that way. إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم, and definitely shaitan wants to cast among you العداوة والبغضاء, enmity and hatred, resentment and hatred. Necessarily, when you are part of the cult of personal satisfaction alone, the cult of selfishness, can't stand the other person, them having something good. But you can show it, you will be hateful. Or if you consciously acknowledge it, that's hate. You can't, that's resentment. You're denying it, but it's still there. Either way, it is anti-community. Bil khamri wal maisiri, through intoxicants and gambling, particularly these two, wa yasuddakum an dhikrillah, and prevents you from remembering Allah. Wa anis salah, and also from prayer. Again, both the dhikr of Allah, especially in the form of prayer, is that which helps you get out of this vicious circle, spiral of selfishness. So are you going to stop? وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ وَاحْذَرُوا. So obey Allah and obey the Messenger and beware. فَإِنْ تَوَلَّيْتُمْ, and if you turn away, فَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا عَلَىٰ رَسُولِنَا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينُ, then know that it was only on our Messenger to just convey the message clearly. لَيْسَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ جُنَاحٌ فِيمَا طَعِمُوا. There is no blame on those who believe and do righteous deeds for what they've eaten. Right? So even if this is khamr, alcohol, before prohibition or before acceptance, conscious acceptance of Islam, if there have been indulgences of that sort, then so be it. That's fine. To continue to insist, no, that's become a permanent part of your system and there's no way back, and that's not the way of Allah. He didn't hold Adam alayhi salam and Hawa alayhim salam. He didn't hold that against them for going next to the tree. You'll go to next to the tree. You will eat from the tree. You will take from the tree. You will have unreal expectations from the tree. And they will be instigated in your heart by shaitan. No problem. Perfectly fine. And what you do afterwards, you continue to go towards the tree again and again and again at the same tree. That's messed up. That's messed up. That's demonic. So if it's done in the past, fair enough, but you come to the recognition, you believe and act righteously. إِذَا مَا اتَّقَوْا وَآمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. When they have taqwa of Allah, believe and do good righteous deeds. So there's three levels of after the conscious recognition. The first level is constant effort. You believe it, you do it. The discipline that taqwa entails with respect to your action, you engage in it, and it's difficult to pull away. But you're doing it, you're doing it, you're doing it. You're putting in that conscious effort. You're keeping yourself away from all the addictions of past life. Then they continue with the taqwa of Allah and belief. The taqwa continues, the self-discipline continues, but the level has now gone from Islam to Iman. Now the amal salih is understood. It has become more of a habit. It in itself has become happily a replacement of the meaningless addiction. It has now become a meaningful habit. Then they persist with taqwa. Taqwa continues across the board, across all these stages. And now the person is seeking excellence, better and better, more and more beautiful, truer and truer. It's the new level in which Iman is understood, struggle is understood. It has become habituated. Now he's a creator of beauty. Now Allah is working with him. Now his khudi is to the level where Khuda bande se khud puche, bata teri raza kya hai? Now his choice shapes history. His choice, Allah responds. It's a new level altogether. ثم اتقوا وأحسنوا والله يحب المحسنين. In other words, Allah loves the people of ihsan. يا أيها الذين آمنوا ليبلونكم الله بشيء من الصيد. You who have believed, Allah will put you to trial by something of the game, which is to be hunted. تناله أيديكم ورماحكم. Your hands and spears can reach it. So in the state of ihram, and there's this perfect target, juicy target, but you can't because you're in ihram. You're capable otherwise, but you won't. A lot of ways, the state of fasting. لِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَخَافُهُ بِالْغَيْبِ. So that Allah knows who fears him in spite of being in the unseen. فَمَنْ اعْتَدَى بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ. And whoever crosses the boundary after this, فَلَهُ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. So for him is a painful punishment. And the painful punishment doesn't necessarily always have to mean hellfire. There is a kafara for doing something like this that is coming up, which in itself is a labor, which is painful, right? Sacrifice that has to be made. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, you who have believed, la taqtulu as-sayda wa antum hurum. So do not kill the wild game while you're in a state of ihram. وَمَنْ قَتَلَهُ مِنْكُمْ مُتَعَمِّدًا. Whoever kills it intentionally, فَجَزَاءٌ مِثْلُ مَا قَتَلَ مِنَ النَّعَمِ. Then a compensation of domestic animal, of an equivalent of one he has killed. يَحْكُمُ بِهِ ذَوَا عَدْلٍ مِنْكُمْ. Judged by two of your just men. That, okay, this is equal to that. So there's a wild animal, those that are open for hunting, and then there's those domestic animals. The domestic animal is going to qualify as a sacrifice. هدي بالغ الكعبة. It is to be brought as an offering to the Kaaba, أو كفارة طعام مساكين, or an atonement of feeding needy people with the food of same value, أو عدل ذلك صياما, or fast the same number of days. ليذوق وبال أمره, so that he may taste the consequences of what he did. عفى الله عما سلف. Allah forgives whatever of this has happened before. ومن عاد, and whoever repeats it, فينتقم الله منه, Allah will take retribution from him. والله عزيز ذو انتقام. Allah is mighty, the owner of retribution. أحل لكم صيد البحر وطعامه. The pursuit of water games, fishing, in its use as food is made lawful for you. متاعا لكم وللسيارة, as a benefit to you and the seafarers, those journeying by sea. وحرم عليكم صيد البر, but the games of the land are not permissible for you. ما دمتم حرما, as long as you're in the state of ihram. Outside of ihram, no problem, hunt as you like. واتقوا الله الذي إليه تحشرون. Observe the taqwa of Allah, to whom you will all be assembled. جعل الله الكعبة البيت الحرام. Allah has made the Kaaba, the sacred house, قياما للناس, a place of standing for the people. والشهر الحرام والهدي والقلائد. So are the sacred months, the animal offerings and the animals colored as a mark of dedication. ذلك لتعلموا, this is for you to realize, أن الله يعلم ما في السماوات وما في الأرض, that Allah knows whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth. وأن الله بكل شيء عليم, and it is Allah for sure, He knows everything. اعلموا أن الله شديد العقاب, so know Allah is severe in retribution. وأن الله غفور رحيم, and that Allah is extremely forgiving and merciful. ما على الرسول إلا البلاغ. If it is not upon the messenger except to communicate the message. والله يعلم ما تبدون وما تكتمون. Allah knows what you're hiding and what you're revealing. What you're revealing and what you're hiding. قل لا يستوي الخبيث والطيب. And so tell them, the good, evil and good are not equal. ولو أعجبك كثرة الخبيث, even though the abundance, simply its magnitude of evil may impress you. فاتقوا الله, so observe the taqwa of Allah. يا أولي الألباب, people of deep sense, people with refined reason. لعلكم تفلحون, so that you are successful. يا أيها الذين آمنوا, you who have believed, لا تسألوا عن أشياء إن تبد لكم تسؤكم. Do not ask questions about things, if clarified for you, will put you in trouble. Going into the nitty-gritty of this, what do we do after this, how do we do after that, is this okay, is this not okay, what about this version of that, is it okay, what about if I'm relaxed? You want to get yourself in more and more trouble? There's plenty out there. The more you go into it, the more difficult you're going to make things on yourself, and then that's all of what your religiosity is going to end up becoming. So a person comes to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do I have to do Hajj every year? Should I do Hajj every year? Rasulullah doesn't answer. He comes in, do we do a Hajj every year? Rasulullah becomes angry. He's like, what if I say yes? What if I say yes? Can you keep up with that? Will you be able to do that? It will become so for the end of times. Let it go. There are so many things that are left to your individual judgment, between you and your conscience and Allah. And it is necessary for that personal growth, for personal spirituality, that it is left as such. You don't have to bring everything. I want absolute clarity, 100% certainty, exactly what to do when. No, you're not going to find that. And thankfully, the more you go out for it, the more confused you're going to get. Thankfully. Because if that was not the case and everything was given to you on a platter, what is it of your own conscience and decision making that is being developed? If everything was no, that's not how it was supposed to be. Anyone who claims otherwise, in their exaggerated eulogizing of Sharia, tells us everything, brothers and sisters, daily, what we do 24 hours of the day. No, it doesn't. It shouldn't. It wasn't supposed to. For a good part within that structure of Sharia is room to breathe and is room to make your own choices. Be responsible. Don't turn Sharia into another form of your superstitions to perform that function for you. To again deliver you of responsibilities of choice making, of exercising that freedom, getting things wrong, learning from consequence. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تسألوا عن أشياء إن تبد لكم تسؤكم. If clarified for you, it would put you in trouble. And this person would come to Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu and ask about hypothetical situations. What if this were to happen and then that were to happen? And then what should we do? And we're like, radiallahu ta'ala, he had the person beaten up. You don't mess. You don't mess. Not with the deen, not in front of Umar. Like those situations have not happened. No room for intellectual gymnastics with him. If and when they do, I will gather the best minds in Mecca, in Medina, from the ashab of Rasulullah, those closest to him, and they would figure it out. For now, get out of here. وَإِن تَسْأَلُوا عَنْهَا حِينَ يُنَزَّلُ الْقُرْآنِ. If you ask about them while the Quran is being revealed, تُبْدَ لَكُمْ, they will be clarified for you. But is that clarification necessarily good? Rasulullah said, what if I do answer that question? What then? What if you have then this additional very concrete lots to carry? Afallahu anha. Allah is letting it go. Wallahu ghafurun halim. Allah is forgiving and tolerant. قَدْ سَأَلَهَا قَوْمٌ مِّن قَبْلِكُمْ. Surely people before you did ask about such things. ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا كَافِرِينَ. Then they became disbelievers because they couldn't sustain it. It was so impractical. It became impractical for them. They couldn't sustain it. Right. قَدْ سَأَلَهَا قَوْمٌ مِّن قَبْلِكُمْ. Surely people before you did ask about them. So continuing with this discussion of how people have this tendency that in their religious zeal, they want to know more and more and more and more and more of what is mandatory and what is obligatory and what is supererogatory and what is prohibited and what is haram, and they want the entire list so that they can really do it well, and the passion and zeal in its own place, overall the attitude is being discouraged as to how it can lead you to become incredibly obsessive, and the purpose of religiosity, the room that this religiosity and spirituality was supposed to give you for personal growth, for your own active participation as a conscious, free individual. How the more and more these external prohibitions and limitations you impose upon yourself, the more you limit that growth. And although it is a facility in one sense, that there is less and less for you to choose, it has a cost. There is less and less that you can now give, which is uniquely yours. And that's choices that you have to make. So you can well imagine how religious potential of a young zealot who turns towards religion, who turns towards God, and wants to know more and more and do more and more. And whatever potential that they have, intellectual, economic, social, aesthetic, rather than carrying their spirituality and their connection with Allah, to develop in all of these wonderful directions and looking to contribute goodness, truth, beauty in the world through all of these avenues, the typical convert to religion, and this doesn't have to be a convert from another religion, it can just be, how we, a conscious, deliberate move towards more religiosity. If it gets caught up in mandatory and prohibited, halal, not just fard and haram, fard and haram, fard and haram, the do's and don'ts. Give me a checklist of do's and don'ts. And that's all of what it becomes. And that's all of what it becomes. So the Quran gives you general instructions, intentionally kept vague. Pray, salah. Your parents have taught you how to pray. But exactly what? How should we pray? Where should we put our hands? Do we or do we not, Rafa then? I mean, what amplitude? What frequency? Do we wiggle the finger in a tayat or do we not wiggle the finger? Are we the toe crushing kind or we're not the toe crushing kind? Which is the absolute truth from Allah? You can go down that route and you can spend weeks and months and arguments and debates and oh my God. And you can become a part of the bid'ah brigade where everything is bid'ah. You can become part of that. The Quran tells you straight out, observe hijab, dress decent. What does that exactly mean? What does that exactly mean? And you go down that path, and before you know it, hands are covered, eyes are covered, jet black dresses. That's now the order of the day. The highest form of taqwa is the more you resemble shuttlecock. And I understand that that has its own space and respect, and people want to do that by all means. But when you portray that as the highest form of taqwa, you're asking for it. You're asking the impracticality of it. Can you carry that in your hospital duties? Can you carry that in your university? And before you know it, hospital duties and universities are also haram. They're not supposed to be carried out either. Okay. If that's what it is, and that's what it is. Example, ما جعل الله من بحيرة ولا سائبة ولا وسيلة ولا حام. So Allah did not institute superstitions like bahira and sa'iba and wasila or ham. What are all of these things? Bahira is a female camel with 5 offsprings, and the last one is a male. Saiba is when somebody became ill and he set a female camel free, and he set that free to gain health. And then the wasila is the first child of a goat, which is, if it is a male, it was to be sacrificed. If not, then it was not supposed to be sacrificed. And then Ham is the male camel whose grandchild was fit to ride, was not used for. Do you see what's going on here? Does that remind you of your fiqh 101? Down to the nitty-gritty details of priority number 100, if at all. Allah says, I have nothing to do with this. I didn't institute these things. They became the religion for the people of Mecca. They were doing it with a religious zeal and a passion and commitment. وَلَكِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يَفْتَرُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ الْكَذِبِ. In fact, the disbelievers have invented lies against Allah. وَأَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. Most of them just don't use their aql. Because the more you have these declarations of mandatory of fard and haram, the less room for aql you're leaving, the more intellectual dwarfism you're promoting. And as suited as that is to the ends of a particular religious class who wouldn't want people to develop intellectually lest they come back and question or ask uncomfortable questions, it is not good for the community. You don't want these individuals. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ وَإِلَى الرَّسُولِ, when they're asked to come towards what Allah has revealed and the Messenger, قَالُوا, they reply, حَسْبُنَا مَا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا. Enough for us is what we've inherited from our ancestors. So now all of a sudden, it's evidence from authority, and the authority of ancestry becomes the absolute rationalization as to why that is the religious way to be. أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَوْ يَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا, even though their fathers did not know anything, that all of what they instituted was without evidence, without knowledge. وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ, and they weren't guided. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, you who have believed, عَلَيْكُمْ أَنفُسَكُمْ, you stand responsible for yourselves. How much of this obsessive religiosity is an escape from genuine responsibility? عَلَيْكُمْ أَنفُسَكُمْ, you're responsible for yourselves. And how another form of this evasion or responsibility comes in when you obsess over others not listening and following. As hurtful as that genuinely is, عليكم أنفسكم, you are responsible for your own self. لا يضركم من ضل, anyone who goes astray will not harm you. Will not harm you. إذا اهتديتم, as long as you're on the right way. إلى الله مرجعكم جميعا, you will all return to Allah, all of you together. And so one of the greatest problems that anyone who starts taking religion seriously is when people don't take them seriously. And for that reason, to be hurt, as Rasulullah was hurt, the Sahaba were hurt. The idea being, you do what you have to do. You become the inspiration that you have to become. You become the teacher that you have to become. Teaching, converting, that's not you. Even if preaching in its appropriate, declared way, as it's supposed to be, converting is not you. It's not your responsibility. Don't become obsessed with that, because that obsession in itself is another wall that you bang your heads against and miss out on so many other genuinely meaningful activities that you should and could have been engaged in. إِلَى اللَّهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ جَمِيعًا فَيُنَبِّئُكُم بِمَا كُنتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ, so he will let you know exactly what you used to do. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, you who have believed, شَهَادَةُ بَيْنِكُمْ إِذَا حَضَرَ أَحَدَكُمُ الْمَوْتُ, testimony should be taken among you when death approaches any of you. حين الوصية, at the time of the will, اثنان ذوى عدل منكم, should be two of your just men, أو آخران من غيركم, or two others from outsiders, from another tribe. إن أنتم ضربتم في الأرض, if you are traveling, in case you are traveling, فأصابتكم مصيبة الموت, and the calamity of death strikes you. تحبسونهما من بعد الصلاة فيقسمان بالله, detain them after prayer to swear by Allah. إن ارتبتم, if you doubt their honesty. لا نشتري به ثمنا, and they should declare in their oath that they are not going to sell this testimony, that they're not going to do away with it, because at the end of the day, the person who is dying, this is his will. The future of his offspring is hanging by it. And if the people who are strangers, and the only way of getting this testimony across is through the strangers and holding these strangers to their commitment to Allah, trusting them on account of their faith, so that the the wealth or the inheritance reaches those who rightfully deserve it. وَلَوْ كَانَ ذَا قُرْبَى, even to a relative. وَلَا نَكْتُمُ شَهَادَةَ اللَّهِ, and we will not hide the testimony of Allah. إِنَّا إِذًا لَمِنَ الْآثِمِينَ, and if we were to do that, then we will be very sinful. فَإِنْ عُثِرَ, but if it is a certain على أنهما استحق إثما, that both of them were guilty of sin, فآخران يقومان مقامهما, then they should be replaced by two other من الذين استحق عليهم الأوليان, from those who were deprived of their right by the first two. فيقسمان بالله, then they should swear by Allah and declare لشهادتنا أحق من شهادتهما, that our testimony is stronger, is truer than the other group pair's testimony. وما اعتدينا, and we have not transgressed. إن إذا لمن الظالمين, if we do that, then we would for sure be unjust. ذلك أدنى أن يأتوا بالشهادة على وجهها, this is more likely that by this procedure they will bear true witness. أو يخافوا أن ترد أيمان بعد أيمانهم, or at least they will be afraid that their oath can be contradicted by subsequent oaths. So whatever you can do with respect to the trust of another person's faith, holding that to account, bringing, reaffirming, reassuring that through the process as to how it goes ahead, and making sure that there is somebody uh, to check that, to balance that, to hold them to account for that. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَاسْمَعُوا, and observe the taqwa of Allah and listen to Him. Because if that is missing, then you can play around with these regulations. وَاللَّهُ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الْفَاسِقِينَ, and Allah does not guide the disobedient people. يَوْمَ يَجْمَعُ اللَّهُ الرُّسُلَ فَيَقُولُ, and the day Allah will assemble the messengers and ask them, مَاذَا أُجِبْتُمْ, what response did you get? قَالُوا لَا عِلْمَ لَنَا, they're going to say, we know nothing. So it's the day of judgment. All of humanity is gathered. Messengers are called out, beginning to end. What did people say to you? How did the people respond to you? They said, they will say, we know nothing. إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ عَلَّامُ الْغُيُوبِ, you, it is you, you are the one who knows all hidden things. إِذْ قَالَ اللَّهُ يَا عِيسَى بْنَ مَرْيَمَ, specifically Allah will call out Isa ibn Maryam and say, أُذْكُرْ نِعْمَتِي عَلَيْكَ وَعَلَى وَالِدَتِكَ, Isa, remember my blessing on you and on your mother. إِذْ أَيَّدْتُكَ بِرُوحِ الْقُدُسِ, and how I strengthened you, empowered you with the Ruh al-Qudus, with the Holy Spirit. تُكَلِّمُ النَّاسَ فِي الْمَهْدِ وَكَهْلًا, you spoke to people when in your cradle and when old of age. وَإِذْ عَلَّمْتُكَ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَالتَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ, and when I taught you the book, wisdom, Torah and Injil, the Gospel. وَإِذْ تَخْلُقُ مِنَ الطِّينِ كَهَيْئَةِ الطَّيْرِ بِإِذْنِي, and with my permission, when you made a form resembling a bird from clay, فَتَنْفُخُ فِيهَا, and then you used to blow into it, فَتَكُونُ طَيْرًا بِإِذْنِي, and it used to become a bird with my permission. وَتُبْرِهُ الْأَكْمَهَ وَالْأَبْرَصَ بِإِذْنِي, when you used to cure the one who was born blind and the leper with my permission. وَإِذْ تُخْرِجُ الْمَوْتَى بِإِذْنِي, and when you used to bring the dead back to life with my permission. وَإِذْ كَفَفْتُ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ عَنْكَ, and when I restrained the Bani Israel from harming you. إِذْ جِئْتَهُمْ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ, when you went to them with clear signs. فَقَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْهُمْ, and those who disbelieved from among them said, إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا سِحْرٌ مُبِينٌ, that this is nothing but clear magic. وَإِذْ أَوْحَيْتُ إِلَى الْحَوَارِيِّينَ, and when I inspired the disciples. So the ashab of Isa alayhi salam received not a prophetic wahi, but an intuitive experience, an intuitive, non-prophetic proclamation from the divine. That there is within our intuitive experiences that which is divine and that which is demonic. A prophetic intuitive experience is divine, protected from the demonic. وَإِذْ أَوْحَيْتُ, specifically with respect to the scripture that they proclaim. وَإِذْ أَوْحَيْتُ إِلَى الْحَوَارِيِّينَ, and when I inspired to the disciples, and aminu bi wa bi rasuli, that believe in me and my messenger. قَالُوا, and they said, amanna, we believe. So how this experience of faith for non-prophets, how there is an intuitive dimension to this experience of faith, to this testification of faith. It is not all based on observation. It is not all based on reasoning. That there is a definitive, intuitive dimension to the process of faith, an undeniable experience. Just like within the scientific community and scientific discovery, an experience of a scientist or the hypothesizing of a scientist, the incredible discoveries, inventions, creativity that emanates from brilliant scientists all across history, but more particularly in the past couple of centuries, how there is a clear-cut intuitive dimension to that by their own testimony. That scientists who were not religious, scientists that did not belong to any organized religion as such, would testify to how their discoveries came to them, appeared to them. The periodic table that we all know, a very important step in its development, appeared to Mendeleev in his dream. A very important step in the representation that the periodic table is came to Mendeleev when he wasn't even thinking about it, and it came to him. How many a Western scientist talk about working through a problem, getting stuck, not being able to do anything about that problem, and as a consequence, giving up on it, getting engaged in something else, some other form of excursion, some other activity with their family, with their friends, traveling, this, that, community service. And when they're not working on the problem, bam, they're struck with the solution of that problem worked out in a way very different, drastically different from the direction that they were going in. And it leads for them to talk about the unconscious sources that of the infinite possibilities that could have come to them, how the one which is most likely to be true, and their subsequent experimentation verifies that it was the bam that they experienced, the intuitive flash that they experienced, that they felt was true. And humanity bears testimony that this growth, this development, this exfoliation of knowledge that we've experienced was impossible. Forget improbable, impossible, given the infinite possibilities that scientists had to work through, that it wasn't humanly possible to work through those infinite possibilities and reach the right ones all the time or most of the time. But they did. They were able to choose from within infinity that which was going to work, that which has been working. So the intuitive capacity of non-prophets and its knowledge-giving capacity, and how The Hawariyun experiencing this and it being an instrumental step in their faith that they proclaimed in Isa alayhi salam. So no objection on religious people from an irreligious people who are given to science, or if not science, then scientific thinking in their daily routine. They are always relying upon these intuitive flashes within their routine lives and living by them, and therefore have no standing to reject religious experience, and that too in its more advanced, developed, and protected form as the prophetic experience of all the prophets culminating with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When you do that, when you close doors upon that, then you close the doors, and you have to close the doors upon a very important source of knowledge for your own scientific institution, for your own scientific thinking process in your non-scientific lives daily. And how much of a dogmatic insistence on rejecting that dimension of human experience has resulted in a degenerate, a dysfunctional scientific paradigm and scientific schools of thought. Anyways, coming back, I gave a presentation on this yesterday, so I had to go on this um, detour. So when the disciples were inspired, and aminu bi wa bi rasuli, they that believe in me and my messenger, qalu, and they said, we believe, amanna washhad bi annana muslimun, we bear witness and bear witness that we are for sure Muslims. إذ قال الحواريون, when the disciples said, Ya Isa ibn Maryam, Isa, son of Maryam, هل يستطيع ربك أن ينزل علينا مائدة من السماء. And this is so beautiful. The intuitive experience has happened. The proclamation of faith has happened, but they still require a further verification and demonstration. They still require further. How scientific is this? How much of the scientific method is being mirrored in this and being honored in response? قَالَ اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Isa alayhi salam responded, the taqwa of Allah, if you really are believers. قَالُوا نُرِيدُ أَن نَأْكُلَ مِنْهَا. They said, we want to eat from it. Be provided from it. And it's providing both. Food, yes, that's what they're asking for concretely, but also a nourishment for their, or verification for their proclamation of faith. وَتَطْمَئِنَّ قُلُوبُنَا, and our hearts feel satisfied. وَنَعْلَمْ, and we know, and so that we may know, and قَدْ صَدَقْتَنَا, that you have spoken the truth to us. وَنَكُونَ عَلَيْهَا مِنَ الشَّاهِدِينَ, and we become witnesses to it. So this request of the Hawariyun is not audacious, it's not arrogant, the way the people of Musa, we want to see not Allah jahra, we want to see Allah outright. It's not like, it's not the Quraysh asking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we want this specific kind of an ayah. The request may be the same, but it's coming from a very different place. It's coming from a very different place. And therefore the response is different. This one is honored. وَنَكُونَ عَلَيْهَا مِنَ الشَّاهِدِينَ قَالَ عِيسَى بْنُ مَرْيَمَ اللَّهُمَّ رَبَّنَا أَنزِلْ عَلَيْنَا مَائِدَةً مِنَ السَّمَاءِ. So Isa alayhi salam goes ahead and makes a dua to Allah, Ya Allah, send us down a table spread with food from heaven. تَكُونُ لَنَا عِيدًا لِأَوَّلِنَا وَآخِرِنَا. It will become a feast, one of a kind for those before us and those after us. وَآيَةً مِنْكَ, and it will become a sign from you. وَرْزُقْنَا, and provide for us. وَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ الرَّازِقِينَ, as you are the best of providers. قَالَ اللَّهُ إِنِّي مُنَزِّلُهَا عَلَيْكُمْ, and Allah said, of course, I will send it down to you. فَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بَعْدُ مِنْكُمْ, but then, after that demonstration and verification, those of you who disbelieve, فَإِنِّي أُعَذِّبُهُ عَذَابًا, I will punish him with a punishment, لَا أُعَذِّبُهُ أَحَدًا مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ, the way I have never punished anyone in the world. وَإِذْ قَالَ اللَّهُ, and when Allah said, Ya Isa ibn Maryam, Isa, son of Maryam, أأنت قلت للناس, was it you? Did you say to the people, اتخذوني وأمي إلهين من دون الله, and take me and my mother as gods other than Allah? قال عيسى سبحانك, exalted are you, Ya Allah. ما يكون لي أن أقول ما ليس لي بحق. I could never say what is not for me to say, which I have no right to. إن كنت قلته فقد علمت. If I had said anything like that, you would have known. تعلم ما في نفسي. You know exactly what's inside of me. ولا أعلم ما في نفسك. I don't know what's inside of you. إنك أنت علام الغيوب. You know knowledge of the unseen. ما قلت لهم إلا ما أمرتني به. I did not say anything to them except what you told me to. أن اعبدوا الله ربي وربكم, which was engage in the ibadah or give yourselves into the ibadah of Allah, who is my Rabb and your Rabb. وَكُنْتُ عَلَيْهِمْ شَهِيدًا مَا دُمْتُ فِيهِمْ. And I was a witness over them. I was responsible for them as long as I was among them. فَلَمَّا تَوَفَّيْتَنِي, but then when you took me up in my entirety, كُنْتَ أَنْتَ الرَّقِيبَ عَلَيْهِمْ. You yourself were watching over them. وَأَنْتَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. And you are a witness over everything. إن تعذبهم فإنهم عبادك. If you punish them, then they're your ibad. وإن تغفر لهم فإنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. But if you forgive them, you are the Almighty, All-Wise. On the day of judgment, Isa alayhi salam standing up for his people, knowing what they've done, saying, you know, you're forgiving. قال Allah, Allah will declare, هذا يوم ينفع الصادقين صدقهم. This is the day when the truth of the people, truth of the true people will be of benefit to them. لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار. What does truth look like? It looks like gardens underneath which rivers flow. That's how it concretely manifests itself on the day of judgment. خالدين فيها أبدا. They will live therein forever. رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه. Allah would be pleased with them and they would be pleased with him. ذلك الفوز العظيم. That is the great success. لله ملك السماوات والأرض وما فيهن. To Allah alone belongs the sovereignty of the heavens and the earth and whatever is in them. وهو على كل شيء قدير. And He has power over everything. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.